Okay, ready for this? Today, we are diving into, get this, a potential shakeup in global trade.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
Right. We're talking about Mexico's Interoceanic corridor.
Okay.
This massive rail line is aiming to compete with, believe it or not, the Panama Canal.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Yeah, so we've got a Wall Street Journal video queued up, along with a bunch of articles,
Okay.
all digging into whether this $7.5 billion gamble could really, disrupt shipping as we know it.
You know what I find so interesting about this project is it's not just about being another shipping route. It's
Right.
about Mexico stepping up, trying to become like a major player in global trade, right?
Yeah.
And trying to reshape their own economy too, especially in the South.
Yeah, it's like we're so used to thinking about the Panama Canal as the way to move stuff between the Atlantic and the Pacific,
Yeah.
but it's hitting some pretty big roadblocks these days.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've been reading paints a kind of a crazy picture, actually.
Really?
Yeah, like picture this. Huge cargo ships, some of them longer than the Empire State Building is tall,
Wow.
stuck in line for, get this, up to 2 weeks just to get through the canal.
Wow.
Drought, serious drought. The water levels are so low.
Wow.
And time is money, right? Especially in shipping. So these delays, they have a ripple effect
Oh, for sure.
on the entire global supply chain.
And that's where Mexico's Interoceanic corridor comes in, right?
Exactly.
For those who don't know, imagine a 186-mile rail line right through the narrowest part of Mexico, a place called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, connecting the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
Basically, it's like a shortcut
Yeah.
to move goods way faster.
It's actually much more than a shortcut when you really get into it.
Oh, how so?
The Mexican government, they're looking at this as a total transformation.
Okay.
They're talking 10 new industrial complexes along this route,
Wow.
hoping to attract foreign investment, boost industries like manufacturing and agriculture.
So it's like a whole new economic ecosystem.
Exactly.
So hold on. It's not just about getting like a T-shirt from Asia to the U.S. faster.
Yep.
It's about changing where those factories are even located in the first place.
You got it.
Wow.
This project could really be a game changer, and not just for Mexico either.
Really?
Think about it. If it works, this could impact global supply chains.
Oh, wow.
Could even change the prices of the things we buy every day.
Okay, but let's talk about the downsides for a sec.
Okay, yeah.
Something this big, there's got to be some risks, right?
Mm.
What are our sources saying?
One of the biggest things is, can they even handle all that traffic?
That's a good point.
They're aiming to move something like 1 million containers every year, but their ports aren't ready for that.
Oh, really?
Think of it this way. You can have the fastest highway, right?
Right.
But if you've got tiny on and off ramps, you're still going to have bottlenecks.
Right. Like building a superhighway in the middle of nowhere with no gas stations, no rest stops, nothing.
Exactly. You've got to have the infrastructure to support all that movement.
Makes sense.
And then there's the environment. Anytime you're talking about cutting through rainforests, building all this stuff.
Yeah, there's going to be consequences.
You got deforestation, habitat loss, pollution.
And what's crazy, the sources we have, they really highlight how the Isthmus of Tehuantepec,
Yeah.
it's incredibly biodiverse, right? It's home to tons of species you don't find anywhere else.
Right.
And then, of course, there are the indigenous communities who've lived there for, I don't know,
Yeah.
centuries.
Right.
Their concerns about how it's going to affect their land, their way of life, those are important.
Absolutely. You can't ignore that.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, economic growth and environmental and social responsibility.
It is.
It'll be really interesting to see how Mexico handles that.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of balancing acts, what about geopolitics? This has got to have some big implications, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What do you think?
This is where it gets interesting, right? So China's been gaining a lot of influence in the region.
Yeah, with that Belt and Road Initiative.
Exactly. They've been funding these massive projects all over Latin America.
So you think Mexico might be trying to position themselves as like an alternative to China?
I think so, especially for countries who are, maybe a little wary of relying too much on China.
Makes sense.
And this project gives Mexico some leverage, right? New alliances, new trade partnerships. It could really shake things up in the Americas.
Wow, so this one project potentially impacting things on like so many different levels.
Totally.
Not just economics, but politics, the environment,
Yeah.
everything really.
It's a lot.
And we've got so much more to get into, like what about the environmental and social impacts in detail?
Yeah, that's important.
And could they even work with the Panama Canal instead of competing?
Interesting question.
We'll dive into all of that in our next segment.
It's wild. You start reading about this project and you get caught up in the numbers, the economics of it all.
Oh, yeah.
But then you dig a little deeper.
Right.
And you realize we can't just brush aside those potential consequences.
Absolutely not, especially for the environment and the people who actually live there.
Exactly.
We were talking before about the biodiversity of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
Right.
But to really get it, imagine an area like the size of Rhode Island.
Okay. Yeah.
But packed with more plant and animal species than almost anywhere else in North America.
Oh.
And then picture like a rail line, roads, industrial complexes all cutting through that.
Yeah, it's a big footprint.
It really is.
Deforestation, that's a huge concern with a project like this.
Right, because it's not just about the trees, is it?
No, not at all.
It's about the entire ecosystem.
Right, you fragment a rainforest like that.
Yeah.
You disrupt everything. Migration routes, animal populations.
Oh, for sure.
You're basically building a fence through their home and saying, okay, deal with it.
Right, they can't just adapt like that.
Exactly.
I did see our sources mention something about wildlife corridors.
Yeah.
Like, as a way to kind of mitigate that.
Yeah, they've talked about that.
What do you think? How effective could that actually be?
It's tricky. It depends, you know. A narrow corridor, that might be fine for like a squirrel or something.
Right.
But a jaguar, not so much.
That makes sense.
And it's got to be in the right place, too.
What do you mean?
You have to understand how the animals move, where they go, and actually connect those fragmented habitats in a meaningful way.
So it's not just about creating these corridors. It's about making sure they work.
Exactly.
They're big enough, they're in the right place, and they're actually protected.
Long term, yeah.
So you need monitoring, you need to prevent poaching. It's a whole thing.
It's a huge undertaking, for sure.
It is.
And it's something, you know, we've got to keep an eye on as this project goes forward.
Absolutely.
See how they handle it.
And then beyond the wildlife, there's the human impact.
Yeah.
These communities, the people who've lived in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec
right.
for generations, they have such a deep connection to this land.
It's their home, you know?
It really is.
And what we're reading, there are concerns
about
relocation, how they're going to be compensated, if they even have a say in the process.
Right, like were they even consulted?
Right, because for them, this isn't just about economics, right?
It's their way of life.
Exactly. It's their culture, their history, their whole identity is tied to this land.
It makes you wonder, you know, whose idea of progress is this?
It's a good question.
Can you really have economic growth and respect the rights and the heritage of these communities at the same time?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And honestly, it's something we should be talking about a lot more.
Oh, for sure.
There's this concept, free, prior, and informed consent. It's really important here.
What does that mean exactly?
Basically, it means making sure these communities, they have a genuine say in projects that are going to affect their lives.
So not just being told what's going to happen.
No, they have to be able to actually agree to it.
Or not agree to it.
Exactly.
Have that power.
And have that decision respected, you know, even if it's not what people want to hear.
Right, right. That's a powerful concept.
It is.
Okay, so we've talked about the forests, the communities.
Right.
But we also have to talk about pollution.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It's easy to forget when you get excited about faster shipping and all that.
Right.
But there's an environmental cost every step of the way.
For sure.
So specifically with the Interoceanic corridor, what are the concerns there?
Well, you're talking about a lot more ships.
Right.
Massive container ships, some of them longer than the Empire State Building is tall.
Yeah, those things are huge.
And they burn this fuel, bunker fuel. It's really dirty stuff.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It releases all sorts of nasty stuff into the air. So sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide.
What does those do?
Those contribute to all sorts of problems. Respiratory problems, acid rain, climate change, you name it.
And it's not just the air, right?
No.
What about like the waste from those ships?
Oh, yeah, that's a concern too.
And accidents? What if there's a spill or something?
Absolutely. You've got ballast water, which ships use for stability.
Okay.
They take it on, they discharge it, and it can carry invasive species.
Oh, wow.
Which can really mess up local ecosystems.
Right, right.
And then there's always the risk of oil spills, accidents involving hazardous materials, especially when you're talking about routes that pass through sensitive areas.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is.
So to deal with all that, you'd need, what, stricter regulations?
Definitely.
Better enforcement?
Absolutely.
Maybe even looking into cleaner fuels for the whole shipping industry?
That's the ultimate goal, I think.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
It does.
Like a decision in Mexico City about fuel standards for ships, that could end up affecting air quality here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Or even the health of coral reefs off the coast of Panama.
It's a global system, for sure.
We're all connected.
We are.
And our choices, they have a much bigger impact than we realize.
They really do.
Okay, so we've talked about all these environmental concerns with the Interoceanic corridor.
Right.
But how do they stack up against the Panama Canal?
Good question.
That's what we're going to look at next. So we've talked about the potential, the concerns, the whole 9 yards with this Interoceanic corridor.
That's a lot to unpack.
It is. But the big question, the one everyone's asking, is can it really compete with the Panama Canal?
Right. Like, can they actually pull this off?
Because that's the end game here, right?
Yeah, it's like David and Goliath, you know.
Except in this case, David's got billions of dollars to throw around.
Exactly. And don't forget, Goliath's got some weaknesses.
Right. Those droughts.
Yeah, the Panama Canal is hurting right now.
Major delays. And that gives Mexico an opening.
For sure.
They're banking on being faster, more efficient, cheaper, especially for goods going between Asia and the East Coast.
That's a huge market.
Huge.
If they can grab a chunk of that, that's a big deal.
Okay, so let's break it down. Speed is obviously key.
Time is money, right?
Exactly. And our sources said the train across the isthmus, that's faster than going through the canal.
Right. But you got to think about the loading and unloading, right?
Right. Getting stuff on and off the ships.
Yeah, that takes time. And that's where the Panama Canal is ahead right now.
Because they've got the infrastructure, they've been doing it longer.
Exactly. In Mexico, they're upgrading their ports, but that's a process.
It takes time. Yeah, and money.
Tons of it.
It's like imagine being a super fast runner, but you trip every time you pass the baton.
Exactly. You're not going to win the race.
And meanwhile, Panama, they're not just sitting around.
No way.
They're widening the canal, making it deeper, getting ready for those mega ships.
It's an arms race, basically.
It really is. Everyone trying to outdo each other.
And then there's the cost. Businesses are always going to go with the cheapest option.
Right. So how does Mexico compete there?
They're offering incentives, tax breaks, trying to make it as attractive as possible.
It makes you wonder, though, what if they teamed up instead?
Teamed up? You mean with the Panama Canal?
Yeah, like, is it crazy to think they could work together?
It's not crazy. It's actually a thing. Co-opetition, they call it.
Co-opetition?
Yeah, like imagine two rival airlines. Instead of fighting over a route, they share it.
Huh.
First one flies on certain days, the other on different days. They both benefit.
So instead of trying to crush each other, they find a way to both succeed.
Exactly, especially in a globalized world. Sometimes cooperation makes more sense.
And in this case, maybe the Panama Canal is better for certain types of cargo, Mexico for others?
Right, they could complement each other, not compete.
It's a cool idea. I'll be curious to see if that happens.
Me too. It's a dynamic situation. Anything could happen.
That's for sure. Well, that wraps up our look at the Interoceanic corridor.
From those massive ships to the tiny details, it's been quite a ride.
It has. We've covered the potential, the risks, the global impact, everything, really.
And hopefully given our listeners plenty to think about.
That's always the goal, to give you the information you need to understand this complex world.
Because, hey, we're all in this together, right?
We are. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.